The Antioch earthquake was one of the most devastating natural disasters in recorded history, taking place on May 29, 526 AD. Antioch was an ancient city located in modern-day Turkey, near the Syrian border, and it was a prominent cultural and economic center of the Byzantine Empire. The quake occurred during the reign of Emperor Justin I, and it caused widespread destruction throughout the city and also its surrounding areas. Some sources describe violent tremors that leveled buildings including churches, public structures, and homes, as well as triggering fires that further consumed the city. The shaking lasted for days, followed by powerful aftershocks that made rescue efforts even more difficult. It is estimated that between 250 and 300,000 people lost their lives as a result of the quake and the fires that followed. Many of the victims were attendees of the Ascension Day service at the Great Church of Antioch, which unfortunately collapsed during the disaster. The total population of this city at the time was likely around 500,000, meaning more than half of the city's inhabitants died or were severely affected. The impact of the earthquake was not limited to immediate human and structural losses, as this city was crippled economically and politically, which meant it would take decades to rebuild. Though Antioch eventually recovered, it never fully regained its former influence. Additionally, the earthquake struck during a period of political instability, and the devastation contributed to the weakening of Byzantine's influence in the region. The Aleppo earthquake struck northern Syria on October 11, 1138, which was devastating due to this city being a major one in this region. Aleppo was part of the medieval Islamic world and one of the most populous cities of its time. The earthquake occurred during a period of conflict between the Crusader states and the Muslim powers in the region, making this event even more tragic. The quake caused widespread devastation across Aleppo and its surrounding areas, and many fortifications and buildings, including homes and public structures, collapsed under the intense shaking. Aleppo's citadel, one of the most heavily fortified structures in the city, suffered damage but remained standing, while many nearby towns and villages were completely destroyed. Sources vary in their estimates of casualties, but modern historians suggest that the death toll may have been as high as 230,000 people. Many of the victims were trapped under rubble, and this disaster left tens of thousands homeless and without any resources. Unfortunately, rescue and rebuilding efforts were slow due to the ongoing conflicts in this region, and the aftermath of the earthquake had lasting effects on Aleppo and its surrounding areas. Though the city was eventually rebuilt, the scale of destruction severely weakened its defenses and infrastructure. The region continued to experience aftershocks and smaller earthquakes in the months following the main event, adding even more tragedy to this horrible disaster. The Ganja earthquake struck the region surrounding Ganja, a city in modern-day Azerbaijan, on September 30th, 1139. Ganja was a thriving center of culture and commerce during the medieval period, part of the Seljuk Empire at the time of the disaster. The earthquake unleashed powerful tremors that devastated Ganja and the surrounding areas, and entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble, with public buildings, homes, and markets collapsing under the force of the quake. The nearby Kura River is believed to have played a role in the disaster, as shifts in the landscape caused by the earthquake may have led to flooding that worsened the destruction. Historical records of the time suggest that 230,000 people perished in the earthquake and its aftermath, making it one of the deadliest earthquakes in history. Many of the casualties were trapped in collapsed structures, and rescue efforts were hindered by the scale of the destruction and the lack of effective resources to manage such a massive disaster. One of the most interesting outcomes of the earthquake was the formation of Lake Goigal, a natural lake created when landslides triggered by the tremors blocked rivers in the surrounding mountains. This lake remains a prominent geographical feature in Azerbaijan today. The aftermath of the Ganja earthquake left the region devastated, with much of the local infrastructure destroyed. Ganja was eventually rebuilt, but the earthquake contributed to a period of economic hardship and instability in the region. The Shaanxi earthquake, which struck on January 23, 1556, is the deadliest earthquake ever recorded. Centered in the Wei River Valley in Shaanxi Province, China, the earthquake devastated a large area of central China, with the effects felt in 97 countries across several provinces. The region was densely populated, and many people lived in cave dwellings called yaodongs. These homes collapsed in large numbers during the quake, contributing to the catastrophic death toll. The magnitude of the earthquake is estimated to have been around an 8, but the unique geological features of this region amplified the destruction. The ground reportedly rolled like waves and split open, causing landslides and massive structural damage. It is estimated that around 830,000 people lost their lives, making this earthquake not only the deadliest one, but also one of the deadliest natural disasters in human history. Entire villages and towns were obliterated, and large portions of the population either died by collapsing structures or buried alive under landslides. The immediate aftermath of the earthquake left survivors facing widespread famine, homelessness, and disease, further worsening the tragedy, and many of the areas affected took decades to fully recover. The disaster also highlighted the vulnerabilities of cave dwellings, leading to changes in architectural practices in the region. The Calcutta cyclone, often considered one of the deadliest cyclones cyclones in history, struck the region around present-day Kolkata, which was at the time known as Calcutta, on October 7, 1737. At the time, Calcutta was a growing colonial settlement under British East India Company control, but much of the region was still densely populated. The cyclone made landfall with an unprecedented intensity, bringing with it a massive storm and powerful winds. The accompanying storm surge caused the Hooghly River to overflow, flooding vast areas around the city and the surrounding countryside. Large ships were thrown far inland by the surge, and many buildings, including colonial structures and local dwellings, were completely destroyed. Early accounts of the disaster are vague and sometimes exaggerated, but historical estimates suggest that around 300,000 people perished in the cyclone and the flooding. Many of the victims were swept away by the storm surge, drowned, or crushed by collapsing buildings. The destruction extended beyond the city, devastating farmlands and villages, contributing to the widespread food shortages in the aftermath. The infrastructure of Calcutta and surrounding areas was severely damaged, with much of the city needing to be rebuilt. The cyclone also disrupted trade in the region, as many ships were destroyed or stranded inland, and the loss of life, combined with the destruction of homes and farmlands, led to a humanitarian crisis, with survivors facing famine and disease. Although exact intensity and the death toll remained debated, its impact was undeniably catastrophic. The Coringa cyclone struck the eastern coast of India on November 25, 1839, causing massive destruction and loss of life. Coringa, a highly populated port town located in the Godavari Delta region of present-day Andhra Pradesh, was hit by one of the most devastating cyclones in history. The storm unleashed violent winds and a colossal storm surge that devastated the town and its surroundings. The cyclone's winds were so powerful that they flattened much of the town, and the accompanying storm surge, estimated to have been around 40 feet high, overwhelmed the coastal areas. This surge swept away thousands of homes, boats, and ships, and Coringa, which had been a thriving trade hub, saw its entire harbor and fleet of approximately 20,000 vessels destroyed. The force of this storm was so overwhelming that it left the region in ruins, and it is estimated that around 300,000 people perished, making it one of the deadliest natural disasters of the 19th century. Many of the victims were drowned by the storm surge, while others perished by the collapse of buildings and trees. This cyclone effectively wiped out Coringa's prominence as a major port, and though the town was eventually rebuilt, it never regained its previous status as a significant center of trade. The disaster also heightened the vulnerability of India's coastal regions to cyclones, a challenge that persists to this day. The Haiphong typhoon struck the northern coast of Vietnam, then part of French Indochina, on October 8, 1881. The typhoon is considered one of the deadliest in recorded history and had catastrophic consequences for the port city of Haiphong and also its surrounding areas. The storm made landfall with ferocious winds and a massive storm surge that swept through Haiphong, which was a key trading center under French colonial control. The typhoon's winds destroyed buildings, uprooted trees, and caused widespread damage to the city's infrastructure. However, it was the accompanying storm surge that was the most lethal. The low-lying areas around Haiphong were quickly overwhelmed by rising waters, drowning thousands of people and destroying homes and farmlands. Estimates of the death toll vary, but it is widely believed that around 300,000 people lost their lives, and most of the victims were primarily residents of Haiphong, with many being swept away by the floodwaters or crushed by collapsing structures. The typhoon also wiped out large portions of the region's rice fields, leading to food shortages, and the aftermath of the typhoon left Haiphong and much of northern Vietnam in ruins. The destruction of homes, businesses, and infrastructure crippled the local economy, while survivors faced the challenge of rebuilding their lives with limited resources. The disaster also led to a humanitarian crisis, as many were left without food or shelter. The Yellow River flood, one of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded history, occurred in China in September 1887. The Yellow River, known as the River of Sorrow, due to its history of destructive floods, breached its banks after a period of heavy rains, leading to catastrophic flooding across the densely populated plains of northern China. The floodwaters spread rapidly over an estimated 50,000 square miles, submerging countless villages and farmlands. The scale of the flood overwhelmed local defenses, many of which were poorly maintained. Millions of people lived in the floodplain, and the rising waters forced entire communities to flee. However, many were trapped or caught unprepared, leading to a massive loss of life. It is estimated that between 900,000 and 2 million people perished in this disaster, either drowned by the floodwaters or succumbing to diseases and famine that followed. The destruction of crops and farmland left survivors without food, and the collapse of local infrastructure got in the way of relief efforts. Outbreaks of waterborne diseases, like cholera, added to the death toll, making the recovery even more difficult. In the aftermath, the social and economic aspects of the region were devastated, and thousands of people were left homeless, with the Chinese government struggling to provide aid due to the unprecedented scale of this disaster. This flood highlighted the vulnerabilities of the Yellow River region and the inadequacy of food control measures at the time. The Haikyuan earthquake, one of the deadliest earthquakes in the 20th century, struck the Haikyuan County in Ningxia, China China on December 16, 1920. With an estimated magnitude of 7.8 to 8.5, the earthquake caused catastrophic destruction across a vast area of north-central China, including the provinces of Ningxia, Gansu, and Shaanxi. This earthquake involved violent shaking, massive landslides, and surface ruptures that obliterated entire villages. In Haikyuan County, almost every building was destroyed, and the lowest soils, common in the region, worsened the disaster as the unstable terrain gave way to deadly landslides that buried countless homes and roads. Ground fissures and subsidence were widespread, further complicating rescue efforts. The estimated death toll ranges from 200 to 274,000 people, and many of the casualties occurred when buildings collapsed during the quake or when people were buried by landslides. Additionally, freezing winter temperatures worsened the situation for survivors, as many were left homeless and exposed to the cold. Infrastructure was wiped out, with roads, bridges, and communication lines completely destroyed. The rural nature of the region, along with its remote location, made it difficult to provide timely aid to those affected. Many survivors faced famine and disease, as the destruction of farmland and food stores disrupted supply lines. The earthquake also triggered a series of strong aftershocks, some lasting well into 1921, which further delayed recovery and added to the destruction. In the years that followed, reconstruction efforts were slow, and the region took a long time to recover from the profound social, economic, and human toll. The Great Kanto earthquake struck the Kanto region of Japan, including Tokyo and Yokohama, on September 1st, 1923, at around 11:58 a.m. With a magnitude of 7.9, the earthquake is one of the most destructive in Japanese history. The tremors lasted about 4 to 10 minutes and were followed by massive fires, triggered by ruptured gas lines and other sources, that swept through the cities. The earthquake caused widespread destruction, flattening homes, buildings, and infrastructure, and many people were killed by collapsing structures or trapped in rubble. However, the fires that erupted after the quake inflicted even greater damage, as strong winds fanned the flames into firestorms, specifically in Tokyo. A fire tornado in the Ryogoku area killed nearly 40,000 people who had sought refuge in an open space. In Yokohama, the second largest city at the time, most buildings were reduced to ruins, and the port was destroyed. The estimated death toll is between 100 and 143,000 people, with thousands more being injured or left homeless, as an estimated 570,000 homes were destroyed. In the aftermath, Japanese society faced enormous challenges, as the destruction of much of Tokyo, along with Yokohama's key ports, had a significant impact on the nation's economy and infrastructure. The disaster also led to widespread social unrest, as rumors of sabotage by Korean residents led to violent anti-Korean riots, resulting in massacres of thousands of Koreans and Chinese by vigilante groups. Reconstruction efforts were swift, and the Japanese government used the disaster as an opportunity to modernize Tokyo's infrastructure. The 1931 China floods, also known as the Yangtze River floods, are considered one of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded history. These catastrophic floods occurred during the summer and autumn of 1931, primarily affecting central and eastern China, with the Yangtze, Huai, and Yellow rivers overflowing due to extreme weather conditions. Unusually high snowmelt from the mountains, intense spring rains, and several typhoons in the summer led to the rivers reaching critical levels. By July, the rivers burst their banks, overwhelming thousands of square miles, and the flooding continued into August and September. The most severe damage was along the Yangtze River basin, one of China's most densely populated regions, and the floods submerged vast areas of farmland and entire cities, affecting an estimated 88 million people. It is believed that between 1 and 4 million people died as a result of this disaster, either directly from drowning or indirectly from starvation, disease, and the breakdown of social order in the aftermath. Waterborne diseases such as cholera, dysentery, and typhoid ran rampant, worsening this tragedy. Thousands of villages and towns were wiped out, leaving millions of people homeless and without food. The collapse of infrastructure, including roads, railways, and communication lines, made rescue and relief efforts extremely difficult. Many regions were isolated, and the Chinese government struggled to respond adequately to the scale of this disaster. The Bhola cyclone struck East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh, in the West Bengal region of India on November 13, 1970. It remains the deadliest tropical cyclone in recorded history, causing an estimated 300 to 500,000 deaths, primarily in the low-lying coastal areas of the Ganges Delta. The cyclone formed over the Bay of Bengal and rapidly intensified into a Category 3 equivalent storm, with winds reaching speeds of up to 115 miles per hour. As it made landfall in East Pakistan, the storm brought a massive storm surge, reaching heights of 20 to 30 feet, which overwhelmed coastal towns and villages. The region's flat terrain, lack of infrastructure, and densely populated settlements made it extremely vulnerable to the storm's destructive forces. The majority of the casualties were caused by drowning, as the storm surge swept over islands and coastal regions, destroying homes, farmlands, and livestock. The devastation was worsened by the lack of an effective warning system and also inadequate disaster preparedness, leaving people with little time to evacuate. Crops and fishing industries were severely impacted, leading to food shortages in the following months. In the aftermath, the Pakistani government's slow response and failure to provide adequate relief efforts fueled widespread anger in East Pakistan. This led to political unrest, which eventually played a significant role in the Bangladesh Liberation War of 1971, resulting in the independence of Bangladesh. International relief efforts were mobilized, but the scale of this disaster overwhelmed initial responses. The Tangshan earthquake struck the industrial city of Tangshan, China on July 28, 1976 at 3:42 a.m. local time. With a magnitude of 7.5, it is one of the deadliest earthquakes of the 20th century. Tangshan, located in Hebei province, was a thriving coal and steel production hub, home to over 1 million people. The earthquake lasted less than a minute, but caused massive destruction, reducing much of the city to rubble. The earthquake struck without warning, catching residents in their sleep. Buildings, including factories, schools, and homes, collapsed almost instantaneously due to the poor construction standards at the time. Railways, bridges, and other infrastructure were also destroyed, complicating rescue efforts. The official death toll given by the Chinese government was approximately 243,000, though some estimates suggest the true number could be as high as 600,000. Hundreds of thousands were injured, and many more were left homeless, with rescue operations being slow due to the scale of the devastation, with many survivors trapped under debris for days. The aftermath of the quake also saw outbreaks of disease and water shortages, further worsening the humanitarian crisis. International aid was limited, as China was still relatively isolated from the global community at the time, although the government did launch a large-scale internal recovery effort. The earthquake's impact extended beyond physical destruction, as it occurred during a politically sensitive time, just months before the death of Mao Zedong, adding to the period's instability. Despite the devastation, Tangshan was eventually rebuilt, and today it stands as a symbol of resilience in China's history. The Indian Ocean tsunami occurred on December 26, 2004, following a massive undersea earthquake with a magnitude of 9.1 to 9.3 off the coast of northern Sumatra, Indonesia. The earthquake triggered a series of devastating tsunamis that struck the shores of 14 countries bordering the Indian Ocean, including Indonesia, Thailand, Sri Lanka, India, and the Maldives. The earthquake occurred along the Sunda megathrust fault, where the Indian plate was subducting beneath the Burma plate. The displacement of the seafloor caused by the earthquake displaced massive amounts of water, generating waves up to 100 feet high in some areas. These waves traveled across the Indian Ocean at speeds of up to 500 miles per hour, reaching coastlines within minutes to several hours after the quake. The tsunami caused widespread destruction in coastal areas, sweeping away entire villages, buildings, and infrastructure. In Indonesia's Aceh province, the hardest hit region, over 167,000 people lost their lives. Thailand's popular tourist destinations, such as Phuket, were also devastated, with thousands of foreign tourists among the dead. Sri Lanka and India suffered heavy casualties, specifically in fishing communities, and in total, the disaster claimed the lives of an estimated 230 to 280,000 people, making it one of the deadliest tsunamis in recorded history. Millions more were displaced, and entire communities were left without food, water, or shelter. In the aftermath, a massive international humanitarian response was launched, with aid pouring in from around the world. The tragedy led to the creation of the Indian Ocean Tsunami Warning System, aimed at preventing similar loss of life in the future. The Haiti earthquake struck on January 12, 2010, near the capital city of Port-au-Prince, with a magnitude of 7.0. It was the most devastating natural disaster in Haiti's history, and one of the deadliest earthquakes of the 21st century. The epicenter was just 16 miles west of Port-au-Prince, in a densely populated area with poor infrastructure, which contributed to the massive scale of destruction. The earthquake caused widespread devastation, flattening buildings, homes, hospitals, and governmental structures, including the presidential palace. Schools, churches, and entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble, and the poor construction standards, combined with the proximity of the quake to the capital, resulted in catastrophic damage. In total, an estimated 220 to 300,000 people lost their lives, with over 300,000 more injured. Around 1.5 million people were left homeless, and Haiti's already fragile infrastructure collapsed under the impact, leading to a humanitarian crisis. Survivors faced shortages of food, water, and medical supplies, while emergency services were overwhelmed. The international community responded quickly with an influx of humanitarian aid, but the scale of the disaster, combined with logistical challenges, got in the way of immediate relief efforts. There was a severe shortage of medical care, and diseases like cholera soon spread in the aftermath. In the years following the earthquake, billions of dollars in international aid were pledged for Haiti's recovery. While some infrastructure has been rebuilt, the country's recovery has been slow due to political instability, corruption, and inefficient use of resources. Many survivors remained in temporary shelters for years after this disaster. Thank you very much for watching this video, and if you learned something, make sure to leave a like, comment down below your thoughts, and subscribe if you would like to see more videos like this one. Thank you again, and goodbye.